Welcome back to the Historian's Tome, where ancient stories help you drift into peaceful sleep. Before we begin tonight's journey, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more historical tales to accompany your rest. We're curious, where are you watching from tonight? What time is it there? Perhaps you're settling in after a long day, or maybe you're winding down in the quiet hours of the night. Wherever you are, make yourself comfortable as we travel back over 2,000 years to discover the Dacians, the proud and mysterious people who once ruled the lands we now call Romania. Long before the modern nation of Romania existed, before the castles of Transylvania touched the sky, and before the name Dracula ever stirred imaginations, a powerful civilization thrived in the Carpathian Mountains and along the Danube River. These were the Dacians, and their story begins in the mists of prehistory, in a land blessed by nature and forged by determination. The territory of ancient Dacia stretched across what is now Romania, Moldova and parts of Bulgaria, Serbia and Hungary. It was a realm of dramatic contrasts and stunning beauty. The Carpathian Mountains curved through the heart of this land like a protective spine, their peaks crowned with snow in winter and cloaked in deep green forests during summer. These mountains held secrets and treasures that would shape the destiny of the people who lived there. Rivers flowed down from the highlands, cutting valleys and gorges through ancient rock. The greatest of these was the Danube, the mighty waterway that formed a natural boundary along the southern edge of Dacian territory. This river served as both a highway for trade and a defensive barrier against invaders. Its waters reflected the changing seasons and witnessed countless generations of Dacian life. The Dacian people themselves emerged from a mixture of ancient Thracian tribes who had inhabited southeastern Europe for thousands of years. They were part of a broader Thracian cultural world that extended across the Balkans, but the Dacians developed their own distinct identity in their mountain homeland. They called themselves something that sounded like Dawi or Daci, though the exact pronunciation has been lost to time. The Greeks and Romans who wrote about them gave us the name we use today. These mountain dwellers were tall and strong, their bodies shaped by lives of physical labor and constant readiness for war. Ancient writers described them as having light-colored hair and fierce expressions. They wore their hair long, and many men sported impressive beards that marked them as warriors and free men. Their appearance alone could strike concern into the hearts of their enemies. The Dacians were not a single, unified people in the earliest times. Instead, they lived in numerous tribes, each with its own leaders and territories. These tribes occupied fortified settlements on hilltops and mountainsides, locations chosen for defense and strategic advantage. The settlements consisted of wooden houses with thatched roofs, surrounded by earthen ramparts and wooden palisades. From these elevated positions, the Dacians could watch the valleys below and spot approaching dangers from great distances. Life in these ancient communities revolved around the rhythms of agriculture and the changing season. The Dacians grew wheat and barley in the fertile valleys. They tended orchards of apple and pear trees. Their vineyards produced grapes for wine, a drink they cherished and consumed in great quantities during festivals and gatherings. The Romans would later praise the quality of Dacian wine, though they thought the Dacians drank far too much of it. Livestock played a crucial role in Dacian life. Sheep grazed on mountain pastures, providing wool for clothing and meat for sustenance. Cattle pulled plows through fields and supplied milk and leather. Horses were especially prized, not just for farm work, but as symbols of status and essential companions in warfare. A Dacian warrior's bond with his horse was said to be unbreakable, forged through years of training and shared dangers. But it was what lay beneath the mountains that truly set the Dacians apart and would eventually seal their fate. The Carpathians held vast deposits of precious metals. Gold and silver veined through the rock, waiting to be extracted by skilled hands. The Dacians became expert miners, developing sophisticated techniques to reach these underground treasures. They dug deep shafts into the mountainsides, supported by wooden frameworks that prevented collapse. They used fire and water to crack the rock, then extracted the ore with bronze and iron tools. The gold and silver they mined transformed Dacian society. Skilled craftsmen melted the raw metal and shaped it into objects of stunning beauty and complexity. They created intricate jewelry featuring spirals, circles, and animal designs. They fashioned ceremonial vessels, decorative armor, and elaborate horse trappings. The wealth generated by this metal work allowed Dacian leaders to grow powerful and their settlements to expand into something approaching cities. Trade networks extended in all directions from Dacian territory. Merchants carried Dacian goods south to Greek colonies on the Black Sea coast. They traveled west to Celtic tribes in Central Europe. They ventured north to the Baltic region, trading for amber, that fossilized tree resin prized throughout the ancient world. In return, Dacians acquired wine, olive oil, fine pottery, and luxury items that enhanced the lives of their wealthy classes. Despite this growing prosperity and contact with other civilizations, the Dacians maintained traditions that stretched back into the distant past. They worshipped gods who embodied the forces of nature and the sky. Their supreme deity was Zalmoxis, a figure shrouded in mystery and legend. Some ancient writers claimed Zalmoxis had once been a man, perhaps even a slave, who learned wisdom in Egypt or Greece, who returned to the Dacians and taught them about the immortality of the soul. Others said Zalmoxis was always a god, dwelling in a sacred cave or mountain, where chosen priests went to receive divine wisdom. The religious beliefs of the Dacians included a fascinating concept. They believed that death was not an ending, but a journey to another realm where Zalmoxis dwelled. Because of this belief, Dacian warriors faced battle with extraordinary courage, viewing death not as something to fear, but as a potential transition to a better existence. This belief would make them formidable enemies to those who sought to conquer them. Priests held positions of tremendous authority in Dacian society. These religious figures were not just spiritual guides, but also advisors to kings, healers of the sick, and keepers of ancient knowledge. They understood the movements of stars and planets. They tracked the cycles of the moon and seasons. They determined auspicious times for planting, for festivals, and for war. A king might command warriors and direct the affairs of state, but he would not ignore the counsel of his priests. The Dacians also practiced rituals that seemed strange and sometimes disturbing to foreign observers. They made offerings to their gods, including animal sacrifices performed with specific ceremonies. Some ancient accounts speak of human sacrifice, though these reports come from Roman sources that may have exaggerated Dacian practices to make them seem barbaric. Whether entirely accurate or not, these stories contributed to the Dacians' reputation as a fierce and mysterious people. As centuries passed and the Dacian tribes grew in strength and sophistication, the stage was being set for the emergence of a leader who would unite them into a genuine kingdom. But that transformation would not come easily. It would require vision, determination, and the threat of external enemies powerful enough to force the independent tribes to recognize their need for unity. In the middle of the 1st century before Christ, as Rome was transforming from a republic into an empire, and Julius Caesar was conquering Gaul, a remarkable figure emerged among the Dacians. His name was Burebista, and he would become the first great king to unite the Dacian tribes into a powerful kingdom that commanded respect and fear throughout the ancient world. Burebista came to power around 82 BC, though the exact date remains uncertain. The fragmented records that survived from this period give us only glimpses of his rise. What we know comes largely from Greek historians who wrote about the periphery of the Roman world, and their accounts sometimes conflict or leave frustrating gaps in the story. Yet enough survived to reveal the outline of an extraordinary achievement. When Burebista became king of his tribe, the Dacian world was divided and vulnerable. Dozens of tribes operated independently, sometimes cooperating but often competing for resources and territory. This division weakened them in the face of external threats. To the south, Celtic tribes raided across the Danube. To the west, Germanic peoples were migrating and pushing against Dacian borders. And in the distance, the shadow of Rome was growing longer, reaching toward the Balkans with unstoppable momentum. Burebista recognized that the old ways could not continue. Unity was not just desirable but necessary for survival. He began by consolidating his authority over nearby tribes, using a combination of military force and diplomacy. Warriors who joined him were rewarded with plunder and prestige. Leaders who resisted faced the full might of his growing army. Gradually, tribe after tribe acknowledged Burebista as their overlord. But Burebista understood that military conquest alone would not create lasting unity. He needed to transform Dacian society from within to give his people a sense of shared identity and purpose that transcended old tribal loyalties. To accomplish this, he turned to religion and social reform, partnering with a high priest named Dacian. Dacian was a figure of immense wisdom and authority. According to later accounts, he was so learned in Greek philosophy and science that some believed he had studied in Egypt or even claimed he possessed supernatural powers. Whether or not these stories were true, Dacian certainly understood how to shape public opinion and inspire devotion. Together, Burebista and Dacian implemented a program of moral and spiritual renewal. One of their most dramatic reforms involved wine. The Dacians had always loved wine, consuming it freely at feasts and festivals. But Burebista and Dacian declared that excessive drinking was weakening the nation. They ordered the destruction of vineyards throughout the kingdom. Warriors cut down grapevines that families had tended for generations. The production and consumption of wine was severely restricted, limited to religious ceremonies and special occasions. This prohibition shocked Dacian society but also demonstrated the authority of the new order. Dacian also strengthened the power of religious institutions. He standardized certain practices and teachings, ensuring that Dacians across the kingdom shared common beliefs and rituals. The worship of Zalmoxis became more organized and formalized. Sacred sites in the mountains became pilgrimage destinations where Dacians from different regions could gather, strengthening their sense of belonging to a single nation. With internal unity growing stronger, Burebista turned his attention outward. His armies marched in all directions, expanding Dacian territory to its greatest extent ever. To the west, he pushed deep into Celtic lands, conquering tribes that had once threatened Dacian borders. To the south, he led his warriors across the Danube, seizing Greek cities along the western coast of the Black Sea. These prosperous trading centers, which had maintained their independence for centuries, now paid tribute to a Dacian king. The expansion northward and eastward brought more Thracian and Scythian tribes under Dacian control. At its peak, Burebista's kingdom stretched from the Balkans to the Black Sea and from the Hungarian plains deep into modern Ukraine. It was a realm comparable in size to many of the great powers of the ancient Mediterranean world. Burebista commanded an army estimated at 200,000 warriors, a staggering force for that era. This rapid expansion brought the Dacians into conflict with Rome, or more precisely, into the complex web of Roman politics during the late Republic. In 48 BC, the Roman civil war between Julius Caesar and Pompey reached its climax. Pompey, fleeing after his defeat at the Battle of Pharsalus, considered seeking refuge with Burebista, whose power and distance from Rome might offer safety. The plan never materialized as Pompey was murdered in Egypt, but the fact that he considered it shows how significant Burebista had become. Julius Caesar himself recognized the potential threat from Dacia. Ancient sources suggest that Caesar was planning a major campaign against Burebista, intending to neutralize this powerful kingdom on Rome's northeastern frontier. Caesar assembled detailed intelligence about Dacian military capabilities and geography. He began gathering supplies and troops for what would have been one of his most ambitious conquests, but fate intervened in the affairs of both great leaders. On March 15, 44 BC, Julius Caesar was assassinated in Rome, struck down by senators who feared his growing power. Shortly before or after this event, perhaps in that same fateful year, Burebista met a similar end. He was murdered by Dacian nobles who had grown resentful of his absolute authority, or perhaps feared the coming war with Rome that his policies seemed to invite. The death of Burebista shattered the unity he had worked so hard to create. Without his commanding presence, the vast Dacian kingdom fragmented back into smaller territories ruled by various leaders. Ancient historians recorded the names of 4 or 5 kingdoms that emerged from the dissolution, each claiming to inherit Burebista's legacy, but none possessing his power or vision. Yet Burebista's legacy endured beyond his life. He had proven that Dacian unity was possible. He had demonstrated that the tribes could stand against the mightiest powers of the ancient world. He had transformed scattered mountain communities into subjects of a kingdom that demanded international recognition. The memory of what he achieved would inspire future generations of Dacian leaders who dreamed of restoring that lost glory. The decades following Burebista's death were a confusing period of division and conflict. Various kings ruled portions of former Dacian territory, sometimes fighting among themselves, sometimes cooperating against external threats. Rome, meanwhile, was consumed by further civil wars as Octavian, Mark Antony, and others struggled for control. The Roman expansion into the Balkans continued, but without Caesar, there was no immediate attempt to conquer Dacia itself. During this time, the Dacians maintained their distinctive culture and way of life. Their fortified settlements in the mountains remained secure. Their craftsmen continued to create beautiful metalwork. Their warriors preserved their martial traditions and religious beliefs. Though politically fragmented, the Dacians remained a coherent people, watching the horizon for the next leader who might unite them once again. While kings rose and fell, while armies marched and borders shifted, the spiritual heart of Dacia remained constant in the mountains of Transylvania. Here, in the Orasti Mountains, the Dacians created something extraordinary, a complex of fortresses and sacred sites that represented the pinnacle of their architectural and engineering achievements. This was the realm of the gods made manifest in stone and timber, where heaven and earth seemed to meet. The most important of these sites was Sarmizegetusa Regia, the ultimate capital and holy city of the Dacian kingdom. Its name means something like the place of the warm waters, or possibly fortress of the Sarmatians, though its true meaning has been debated by scholars for generations. Whatever the name meant to those who built it, Sarmizegetusa was unlike anywhere else in the Dacian world. The location was chosen with obvious care. Sarmizegetusa stood at an altitude of over 3,000 feet, nestled in a valley surrounded by even higher peaks. To reach it required ascending narrow mountain paths that twisted through dense forests. This remoteness provided security but also created an atmosphere of mystery and sanctity. Those who made the difficult journey to the capital felt they were entering a special realm, separate from the ordinary world below. The city was not large by the standards of Rome or Athens. Its permanent population probably numbered in the thousands rather than tens of thousands. But what Sarmizegetusa lacked in size, it compensated for in symbolic importance and architectural sophistication. This was where the Dacian king held court, where high priests performed the most important ceremonies, and where the wealth and artistic genius of the nation were concentrated. The defensive works of Sarmizegetusa were formidable. Multiple walls enclosed the city, constructed with a technique that combined stone blocks with timber beams. This method, called murus Dacius or Dacian wall by the Romans, created structures that were both flexible and strong. The timber absorbed shock and prevented the stone from cracking, while the stone provided mass and fire resistance. These walls could stand against siege engines and earthquake alike. Within the fortifications stood structures that amazed even Roman engineers when they finally saw them. There were rectangular buildings with wooden columns and stone foundations serving as administrative centers and royal residences. There were workshops where craftsmen produced the finest metalwork in gold and silver. There were storage buildings filled with grain, weapons, and treasures. But the most remarkable features of Sarmizegetusa were its sanctuaries, the sacred spaces where the Dacians worshipped their gods and sought to understand the mysteries of the cosmos. These were not simple altars or small shrines, but elaborate architectural complexes that demonstrated advanced knowledge of geometry, astronomy, and engineering. The largest sanctuary was a massive circular structure made of precisely shaped blocks of andesite, a volcanic stone quarried from nearby mountains. The blocks were cut and fitted with such precision that no mortar was needed, each stone resting perfectly against its neighbors through careful calculation and craftsmanship. The circle was approximately 100 feet in diameter, with the stone blocks arranged in concentric rings and carefully aligned with cardinal directions. Modern archaeologists who studied this sanctuary discovered something astonishing. The placement of certain stones corresponded to astronomical observations. The structure functioned as a kind of observatory and calendar, allowing priests to track the movement of the sun, moon, and stars. On the solstices and equinoxes, sunlight would fall in specific patterns on marked stones, confirming the turning of seasons and the proper times for rituals and agricultural activities. Near the Great Circle stood other sanctuaries with different shapes. There was a smaller circular temple, also made of precisely cut stone. There were rectangular sanctuaries with rows of wooden columns, their foundations carefully measured and aligned. Some featured arrangements of stone discs set into the ground, their purpose still debated by scholars but clearly related to ceremonial or astronomical functions. These sacred structures were not isolated elements but parts of a carefully planned complex. Water channels ran between them, carrying mountain springs through the sanctuaries. Stone-paved paths connected different areas. The entire layout suggested a sophisticated understanding of urban planning and sacred geography, a desire to create a space where human order reflected cosmic order. The knowledge required to build these sanctuaries raises intriguing questions. How did the Dacians acquire such advanced understanding of astronomy and geometry? Some of this knowledge surely developed locally over many generations of observation and experimentation. But there are also hints of outside influence. Greek merchants and settlers lived in cities along the Black Sea coast, within the orbit of Dacian power. Some Greeks may have traveled to the mountain capital, bringing their learning with them. The high priest Dacian, companion of Burebista, was said to have possessed extraordinary knowledge of Greek science and philosophy. Whether he gained this through direct study in Greek cities or learned from visiting scholars, he apparently brought new ideas to the Dacian priesthood. These ideas merged with indigenous traditions to create something unique, a spiritual and intellectual culture that was distinctly Dacian, yet cosmopolitan. Sarmizegetusa was not the only fortified site in the Orasti Mountains. Several other citadels surrounded it, each perched on a different peak, together forming a defensive network. There was Costesti, with its massive rectangular tower that still stands partially intact today. There was Blidaru, with its terraced fortifications climbing up a steep hillside. There was Piatra Rosi, the Red Rock, named for the color of its stone walls. These satellite fortresses served multiple purposes. They provided additional defensive positions, making it nearly impossible for an enemy to approach Sarmizegetusa without being observed and harassed. They housed garrisons of warriors ready to respond to threats. They also served as administrative centers for the surrounding territories. places where taxes were collected, justice was dispensed, and royal authority was manifested. The paths connecting these fortresses were engineering marvels in themselves. Dacian builders carved roads into mountainsides, supported by retaining walls and drainage systems. In places where rock faces were too steep, they constructed wooden platforms and bridges, allowing people and supplies to move between sites, even in difficult terrain. These roads were not merely utilitarian, but also enhanced the symbolic landscape. Physical connections that reinforced political and spiritual unity. Life in and around these mountain sanctuaries followed rhythms shaped by religion and royal power. Priests performed daily rituals in the sanctuaries, maintaining the favor of the gods. On important festival days, larger crowds gathered, climbing from lower settlements to participate in ceremonies. These gatherings reinforced social bonds and reminded all Dacians of their shared identity and beliefs. The mountain complex also served as a royal treasury. The wealth of the kingdom flowed upward to Sarmizegetusa, where it was stored in guarded vaults and displayed in the king's halls. Ambassadors from foreign powers who made the arduous journey to the Dacian capital would have been awed by the gold and silver, the skilled craftsmanship, the architectural sophistication. They would return home with reports that the Dacian king ruled from a mountain paradise, protected by impregnable fortresses and blessed by powerful gods. For the Dacian people, these sacred mountains represented the center of their world, the axis around which everything else revolved. However far they might travel, whatever challenges they might face, they could look toward the distant peaks and know that there, in that special place, the heart of their nation continued to beat, strong and eternal. As the first century after Christ progressed, Rome continued its inexorable expansion. The empire now stretched from Britain to Arabia, from Spain to Syria. Most of the known world bowed to Roman authority. Yet on the northern frontier, beyond the Danube River, the Dacian kingdom remained independent, a persistent reminder that Rome's power had limits. Into this tense situation came the greatest of all Dacian kings, a leader whose name would echo through history and whose struggle against Rome would become legendary. His name was Decebalus, and he would be the last king of independent Dacia, a tragic hero who fought brilliantly but ultimately could not overcome the might of the empire. Decebalus came to power around 87 AD at a moment when Dacian fortunes were rising. The divided kingdoms that had existed since Burebista's death were being reunited under strong leadership. Decebalus, whose name meant something like strong as 10 men or brave as 10, was either elected king by the Dacian nobility or seized power through force and personal charisma. The exact details are lost, but the result was clear. A new leader of exceptional ability now ruled from Sarmizegetusa. The new king immediately faced a crisis. The Roman Emperor Domitian, seeking military glory to enhance his prestige at home, launched a campaign across the Danube into Dacian territory. A Roman army under the command of Cornelius Fuscus invaded in 87 AD, confident of quick victory. The Romans had defeated countless enemies. The Dacian barbarians, as they called them, would surely be no different. But Decebalus proved to be a different kind of enemy. He used the terrain to his advantage, luring the Romans into mountain passes where their superior discipline and equipment counted for less. Dacian warriors ambushed Roman columns, striking from the forests and then melting away before reinforcements could arrive. In a decisive battle, the Dacians not only defeated the Roman army, but killed Cornelius Fuscus himself and captured the legion's eagle standard, the most sacred symbol of Roman military pride. The victory sent shockwaves through the empire. Romans had grown accustomed to triumph. The loss of an eagle standard was a humiliation that demanded vengeance. Domitian organized another campaign in 88 AD, this time with a larger force. The Romans pushed deeper into Dacian territory, and at a place called Tapai, in a mountain pass, a massive battle occurred. The fighting at Tarpai was savage and prolonged. Roman discipline clashed against Dacian fury. Bodies piled up on both sides as neither force would yield. Contemporary accounts speak of horrifying casualties, of the ground running red with blood, of warriors fighting even after suffering mortal wounds. The outcome was ambiguous. The Romans claimed victory because they held the field at the end, but their losses were so severe that they could not continue the campaign. Decebalus had stopped Rome once again. The stalemate led to negotiations. In 89 AD, a peace treaty was concluded between Domitian and Decebalus. The terms were surprisingly favorable to Dacia. Rome would pay Decebalus an annual subsidy, effectively tribute by another name. Rome would also provide Dacian engineers and craftsmen to help build fortifications and develop infrastructure. In return, Decebalus would recognize Roman suzerainty in a largely symbolic way and help guard the frontier against other barbarian tribes. This arrangement satisfied no one completely. Many Romans saw it as shameful to pay tribute to barbarians. Many Dacians chafed at even symbolic submission to Rome, but it bought time for both sides. Rome could focus on other frontiers and internal problems. Decebalus could strengthen his kingdom, using the peace to complete the reunification of Dacian tribes and improve his defenses. Decebalus proved to be a skillful ruler during this period of peace. He completed the fortification system in the Carpathian Mountains, ensuring that Sarmizegetusa and the surrounding citadels were as strong as human hands could make them. He reorganized the army, learning from the Roman military model while preserving Dacian traditions. He encouraged trade and crafts, bringing prosperity to his kingdom. He maintained the religious institutions that gave Dacian society its cohesion and sense of purpose. The king also engaged in diplomacy with other peoples around Dacia's borders. He made alliances with tribes that had reasons to resist Rome. He sent ambassadors to distant peoples, building a network of relationships that might prove valuable if war came again. Some sources suggest he even made contact with Parthia, Rome's great rival in the east, exploring the possibility of coordinated resistance to Roman expansion. But Decebalus must have known that the peace could not last forever. Rome did not accept permanent equals. Every treaty was either a prelude to friendship that would lead to absorption or a pause before renewed conquest. And in Rome, powerful men were watching Dacia with hungry eyes, seeing not an independent kingdom to be respected, but a wealthy province waiting to be claimed. In 98 AD, a new emperor came to power in Rome. His name was Trajan, and he would prove to be one of the greatest military commanders in Roman history. A man of ambition and ability who dreamed of expanding the empire to its ultimate extent. Trajan looked at the situation on the Danube frontier and saw an intolerable anomaly. He saw the subsidy payments as tribute from Rome to barbarians. He saw a wealthy kingdom whose gold and silver could fill Roman coffers. He saw a military challenge that, if successfully met, would bring him eternal glory. For 3 years, Trajan prepared for war with meticulous care. He assembled a massive army, gathering the best legions from across the empire. He improved roads leading to the Danube, ensuring that supplies could reach his forces. He built a fleet of ships to control the river. He gathered intelligence about Dacian fortifications and military capabilities. When he was finally ready in 101 AD, Trajan launched an invasion that would dwarf all previous Roman campaigns against Dacia. Decebalus must have watched these preparations with grim determination. He knew what was coming. He prepared his own forces, stockpiled supplies in his mountain fortresses, and steeled his people for the greatest test they had ever faced. The fate of Dacia, the survival of an ancient culture, the freedom of a proud people, all now hung in the balance. In the spring of 101 AD, Trajan led his army across the Danube River, beginning what would become one of ancient Rome's most famous military campaigns. The emperor commanded a force estimated at over 100,000 soldiers, including elite legions, auxiliary troops from across the empire, and a substantial cavalry contingent. It was a war machine of unprecedented power, and its objective was clear: the complete subjugation of Dacia. The Roman advance began with systematic efficiency. Trajan did not rush headlong into Dacian territory, but moved methodically, securing each region before proceeding to the next. His engineers built roads and bridges as the army advanced, ensuring that supply lines remained intact and that retreat routes would be available if needed. Fortified camps were established at strategic points, creating a network of Roman power that gradually pushed deeper into Dacia. Decebalus responded with a strategy that played to Dacian strengths. He avoided large set-piece battles where Roman discipline and superior numbers would dominate. Instead, he employed guerrilla tactics, harassing Roman supply columns, ambushing isolated detachments, and then retreating into mountain fastnesses. Dacian warriors appeared suddenly from forests and ravines, struck hard and fast, and vanished before Roman reinforcements could arrive. This kind of warfare frustrated the Romans and inflicted a steady stream of casualties, but it could not ultimately stop Trajan's advance. The sheer size and resources of the Roman force meant that losses could be replaced, while every Dacian warrior who fell was irreplaceable. Decebalus was fighting a war of attrition he could not win through harassment alone. The critical moment of the first campaign came at Tome, the same mountain pass where Decebalus had fought Domitian's army to a standstill years earlier. Here, Trajan forced a major battle, and here the clash between two determined forces reached terrible intensity. The fighting lasted for days, with neither side gaining a decisive advantage. Wounded soldiers were so numerous that Trajan himself supposedly tore up his own clothing to make bandages when the medical supplies ran out. Eventually, Roman persistence and numbers prevailed. The Dacians were forced to abandon their position and retreat further into the mountains. Trajan's army pushed onward, approaching the sacred capital of Sarmizegetusa Regia. But before the Romans could reach the mountain sanctuaries, winter arrived with savage force. Snow blocked the mountain passes. Temperatures plummeted. Continuing the campaign became impossible. Trajan withdrew his forces to winter quarters south of the Danube, but he left garrisons in the territory he had conquered, establishing a permanent Roman presence in Dacia. During the winter of 101–102 AD, both sides recovered and prepared for the next round of fighting. Decebalus used the respite to attempt diplomacy, sending envoys to Trajan to negotiate peace terms. But the Roman emperor's demands were harsh. Dacia must become essentially a client state, dismantle its fortifications, surrender much of its military capability, and accept a permanent Roman garrison. These terms would have meant the end of Dacian independence in everything but name. Decebalus may have accepted these terms temporarily, playing for time, hoping that political developments in Rome or problems on other frontiers might force Trajan to withdraw. But the Dacian king also continued strengthening his defenses and maintaining his army, actions that suggested he had not truly submitted. In 105 AD, claiming that Decebalus had violated the peace terms, Trajan launched a second and even more massive campaign. This time, the emperor was determined to finish the conquest completely. The Roman army that crossed the Danube was larger than before, and it advanced along a new route, crossing the river on a spectacular stone bridge that Trajan had ordered, built during the interval between the wars. This bridge, designed by the brilliant architect Apollodorus of Damascus, was one of the engineering wonders of the ancient world. It spanned the Danube at its widest point, over 3,000 feet from shore to shore, supported by 20 massive stone piers. The bridge allowed Roman forces to cross the river regardless of weather or season, eliminating one of Dacia's natural defensive advantages. The second campaign was more devastating than the first. Trajan's forces advanced on multiple routes, dividing Dacian defenses. Roman siege engineers brought specialized equipment for attacking the mountain fortresses. The fighting was brutal and relentless as the Romans systematically reduced Dacian strongholds one by one. Decebalus fought desperately to save his kingdom. Ancient sources describe him personally leading counterattacks, rallying his warriors with speeches and example. But the tide of war was turning inexorably against him. One after another, the fortresses around Sarmizegetusa fell to Roman assault. The outer defenses of the sacred capital were breached. In one dramatic incident, Dacian warriors attempted to assassinate Trajan himself. A group of fighters infiltrated near the Roman camp, hoping to kill the emperor and perhaps throw the invasion into chaos. The plot failed, but it demonstrated the determination and courage of Decebalus's people, fighting against overwhelming odds to preserve their freedom. As 106 AD progressed, the situation became hopeless. Roman forces surrounded Sarmizegetusa Regia, cutting off supplies and reinforcements. The defenders fought valiantly, but starvation and disease joined Roman siege engines as enemies. Finally, the sacred capital fell. Roman soldiers entered the sanctuaries where Dacian priests had performed their rituals for generations. The treasures of the kingdom, vast quantities of gold and silver accumulated over centuries, fell into Roman hands. Decebalus himself escaped from the capital before its final fall. With a small band of loyal followers, he fled into the more remote mountains, hoping perhaps to continue resistance, or at least to die free rather than in Roman chains. But Roman cavalry pursued him relentlessly. Trajan had sent special units with orders to capture the Dacian king alive or dead. In a remote valley, the pursuers finally cornered Decebalus and his remaining companions. Seeing that escape was impossible, and knowing what fate awaited captured enemy leaders in Rome, the great king made his final choice. Rather than surrender, rather than be paraded through Roman streets in chains and then executed for the entertainment of crowds, Decebalus drew a curved dagger and cut his own throat. The last independent king of Dacia died by his own hand, choosing death over humiliation. A Roman cavalryman named Tiberius Claudius Maximus, who was present at the end, later commissioned a tombstone depicting this moment. The stone shows Decebalus on his knees, holding a dagger to his throat, while the Roman soldier reaches out as if to stop him or perhaps to claim his prize. It is a frozen moment of tragedy, marking the end of a kingdom and an age. The head of Decebalus was cut from his body and brought to Trajan as proof of victory. According to some accounts, it was later thrown down the Gemonian stairs in Rome, a symbolic gesture that demonstrated the fate awaiting those who resisted Roman power. Whether this gruesome detail is true or not, the message was clear. Dacia had been conquered. The kingdom that had resisted Rome for decades no longer existed. The fall of Sarmizegetusa Regia and the death of Decebalus in 106 AD marked the end of independent Dacia, but it was not quite the end of the Dacian story. What happened next was a transformation that would change the region forever, creating something new from the ashes of the old kingdom. Trajan celebrated his victory with extraordinary splendor. In Rome, he organized games that lasted for 123 days, featuring gladiatorial combats, animal hunts, and elaborate theatrical performances. He erected monuments to commemorate the conquest, most famously Trajan's Column, a massive stone pillar carved with spiraling scenes depicting the Dacian Wars. This column still stands in Rome today, a detailed visual record of the campaigns carved in marble that winds around the column for over 600 feet. The carved scenes on Trajan's Column show us glimpses of what happened during those wars. We see Roman soldiers building camps and bridges, marching through difficult terrain, besieging fortresses. We see Dacian warriors with their distinctive curved swords and pointed caps, fighting bravely against the legions. We see prisoners being taken, villages burning, and the sacred capital falling. The column was propaganda meant to glorify Trajan and Rome, but it also preserves details of Dacian life and warfare that would otherwise be lost to history. The wealth seized from Dacia was staggering. Ancient sources claim that Trajan captured over 5 million pounds of gold and twice as much silver from the Dacian treasuries and mines. Whether these numbers are accurate or exaggerated, the treasure was certainly immense. It filled Roman coffers and financed building projects across the empire. The Forum of Trajan in Rome, one of the grandest architectural complexes of the ancient world, was built largely with Dacian gold. But Trajan did more than just loot Dacia and leave. He was determined to transform the conquered territory into a thriving Roman province. The region was too valuable and too strategic to remain merely a defeated enemy. It needed to become properly Roman, integrated into the empire's administrative and economic systems. Colonization began almost immediately. Trajan ordered settlers brought from across the empire to populate the new province. They came from Italy, from Greece, from Syria, from Africa, from dozens of different regions, seeking new opportunities in the conquered land. Some were veterans of the Dacian wars, given land as a reward for their service. Others were merchants, craftsmen, and farmers attracted by promises of fertile soil and fresh starts. These colonists established new cities built in the Roman style, with forums, temples, bathhouses, and amphitheaters. Ulpia Traiana Sarmizegetusa was founded near the site of the old Dacian capital, though in the lowlands rather than the mountains, serving as the provincial capital. Other cities grew at strategic locations, connected by Roman roads that now crisscrossed the former kingdom. The native Dacian population faced a complex and often tragic situation. Many had been killed in the wars. Ancient sources speak of enormous casualties, of entire villages destroyed, of populations displaced or enslaved. Some Dacians fled beyond Roman reach, moving north or east into territories not yet conquered. But many remained, adapting as best they could to the new reality. Some Dacians collaborated with Roman authority, seeing cooperation as the path to survival and perhaps prosperity. They learned Latin, adopted Roman customs, and integrated into the colonial society. Over generations, their Dacian identity would blend with Roman culture, creating something hybrid, neither purely one nor the other. Others maintained resistance for a time. Small bands of fighters operated from mountain hideouts, conducting raids against Roman installations and colonists. But without a kingdom to support them, without the resources and organization that Decebalus had commanded, these resistors could accomplish little. Gradually, they were hunted down or gave up the fight, accepting that the old world was gone forever. The Dacian language began to fade as Latin became dominant. Parents taught their children the language of power and opportunity. Old religious practices were suppressed or syncretized with Roman gods. The priests who had once held such authority in Dacian society disappeared or were marginalized. The sacred sanctuaries in the mountains were abandoned or destroyed, their astronomical alignments no longer consulted, their rituals no longer performed. Yet something of the Dacian spirit persisted beneath the Roman veneer. The people who lived in this land, whether colonists or natives or the children of mixed families, adapted to the mountains and valleys that Dacians had known for centuries. They learned the same agricultural cycles, faced the same weather patterns, developed connections to the landscape that transcended political boundaries. The gold and silver mines that had made Dacia wealthy now enriched Rome, but they were still worked by hands that knew the mountains. The fortresses that Dacians had built were sometimes occupied by Roman garrisons, their massive walls now serving new masters. The forests and rivers remained unchanged, indifferent to which empire claimed sovereignty over them. For about 170 years, Dacia remained a Roman province, an island of Latin civilization surrounded by unconquered barbarian territories. It was always a frontier province, always vulnerable to attacks from beyond the borders. Roman military might protected the cities and major settlements, but the province never knew complete peace. During these Roman centuries, the population of Dacia continued to evolve. More colonists arrived. The descendants of Dacians and Romans intermarried. A provincial culture developed that combined elements from many sources. Latin was spoken in the cities and increasingly in the countryside, but the Latin spoken in Dacia began to diverge from the Latin of Rome, incorporating local words and developing its own character. This Dacian Latin would prove remarkably persistent. Even when Rome's grip on the province eventually weakened, even when the legions withdrew and imperial administration collapsed, the language remained. It evolved over centuries into what linguists call Eastern Romance, and eventually into Romanian, the language spoken in the region today. Through this linguistic continuity, something of both Rome and ancient Dacia survived into the modern world. In 271 AD, facing increasing pressure from migrating barbarian peoples and finding the province difficult and expensive to defend, the Roman Emperor Aurelian made a momentous decision. He ordered the evacuation of Dacia, withdrawing the legions and official administration south of the Danube. The Roman province was abandoned after less than 2 centuries of existence. What happened to the population after this withdrawal remains debated by historians. Some argue that the Romanized population largely retreated with the legions, abandoning the territory to invading tribes. Others contend that much of the population remained, continuing to speak their Latin dialect and maintaining their cultural identity through centuries of barbarian invasions and migrations. The truth probably lies somewhere between these extremes. Some people surely left seeking the security of territories still under Roman control. Others remained, adapting once again to new circumstances, surviving as their ancestors had survived countless changes of fortune. The land itself, the mountains and valleys that had sheltered Dacians and then Roman colonists, now witnessed new peoples arriving and claiming dominion. For over 1,000 years after Rome's withdrawal, the former territory of Dacia saw waves of migration and conquest. Goths, Huns, Avars, Slavs, Bulgars, Magyars, and many others passed through or settled in the region. Each left some mark on the population and culture. Yet, through all these changes, communities speaking a Latin-derived language persisted in the mountains and hills, carrying forward something of the ancient heritage. When these communities finally emerged into clear historical record in the medieval period as Romanians, they saw themselves as descendants of both Romans and Dacians, inheritors of a double heritage. Medieval Romanian chroniclers told stories of Trajan's conquest and colonization, creating foundation myths that linked their people to the ancient empire. But they also remembered Decebalus, honoring the brave king who fought for his people's freedom. Modern Romania takes its name from Rome, acknowledging the Roman connection. But Romanian national identity also claims the Dacians, celebrating them as ancestors and freedom fighters. Statues of Decebalus stand in Romanian cities. The ruins of Sarmizegetusa Regia are protected as national treasures. The story of the Dacian kingdom has become part of the narrative that Romanians tell about themselves, a source of pride and historical continuity reaching back over 2,000 years. The physical remains of ancient Dacia continue to speak to us across the centuries. The massive fortifications still crown mountain peaks in the Orasti range. The sanctuaries at Sarmizegetusa, though damaged by time and treasure hunters, reveal their astronomical sophistication to patient archaeologists. Museums display the exquisite gold and silver work of Dacian craftsmen, spirals and circles that once adorned the bodies of warriors and priests, now resting in climate-controlled cases. These ruins and artifacts are all that remain of a kingdom that once challenged Rome, of a people who worshipped Zalmoxis and believed death was but a journey, of kings who united mountain tribes into a nation. The Dacians live now only in fragments, in carved stones and buried treasures, in place names and half-remembered legends, in the genetic heritage of people who still inhabit their ancient homeland. But perhaps that is enough. Perhaps the persistence of the story itself, the fact that we can still speak the names of Burebista and Decebalus, that we can still walk among the ruins where they walked, that we can still wonder at what they achieved and mourn what was lost. Perhaps this is a kind of victory against oblivion. They are not forgotten. The echo of their defiance still sounds, and in that echo, something of the ancient Dacian spirit endures. As you drift towards sleep now, let your mind wander through those mountain valleys. Imagine the fortresses standing silent in moonlight, their stones remembering the hands that placed them centuries ago. Imagine forests whispering with the passage of peoples long vanished. Imagine rivers flowing as they have always flowed, carrying the memories of countless generations to the sea. The Dacians are gone, but the land they loved remains, and their story has become part of the larger human story, a tale of courage and culture, of resistance and transformation, forever woven into the fabric of history. Rest now, knowing that even kingdoms that fall can leave legacies that endure. Sleep peacefully, and let the distant past enfold you like the comfort of old stone walls beneath ancient stars.